Number 1. Stop. This is a scary story that, although frightening to me, the worst part of it happened to someone other than me. But I was very scared when I found out what had happened. I'm not going to tell you where this happened. Although the story made the newspapers, the family of the victim has wanted privacy for years. All I will say about where we live is that we live in a really mountainous area, and that normally makes the rides that I take really fun and beautiful. I was driving home from work. I worked in a fast food restaurant. At the time, I was the closing manager. We were open late, and I was literally the last person to close the store in that area. It was dark and dead outside, and I lived in a very quiet town that at the time had been a place for people to move at retirement. My point being that it was very quiet, and there were almost no businesses open. There was nearly no cars on the road. The bad thing for me is that I needed to get gas, and I had to find a place that was still open. Right out of the town, there was one that was open all day and night. It was a rather new store. But even then, this happened before you could pay gas right at the pump, so I would have to go inside. This was alright anyway because I wanted to get a pop. Things seemed weird right away from the get-go. I mean, it was expected that late at night, there would only be one person working. No cliches here. It was a very nice, new and bright store. What seemed weird, though, was that the guy who was running the place, he was nowhere to be found. He wasn't at the register, or even somewhere that I could see him. I went to get my drink, and still, there was no one in the store. I went up to the register and wondered what was going on. I was up there for a few minutes, looking around, wondering what was going on. Finally, a door to what I assumed was the back room to the store opened up, and a guy came up towards the register. While there was nothing unusual about his looks, again, leaving out horror movie cliches about gas stations, I could tell something was definitely wrong with him. He looked annoyed and fidgety. It was almost like I had interrupted something that he was doing, which he obviously felt was more important than doing his job. He didn't say anything to me about how he could help me or ask me what I needed, and when I didn't say anything right away, he gave me a really annoyed look that seemed to say to me, well, what do you want? I told him that I needed $20 or something on the pump, and I wanted to buy the soda too. He quickly rang up, took my money, and gave me my change. Once the guy was done, he began to walk back toward the door that he had come from. He stopped, though. It was almost as if he could feel my eyes on him, and he turned around and looked at me. He didn't talk, but just gave me a very rude look that told me, well, what has taken so long for you to leave? It took me a moment to shake it off, and also to tell myself that I would never pay money at this place again. I turned to leave, and then he turned and went back to the door and went through it. Mostly I was annoyed to have spent some money at a place with such lousy customer service. I didn't give any thought at the time as to why the guy may have been acting like that in the first place. I pumped my gas. Then I just got in my car, drove home, and figured I would never ever think about it again. In the morning I got up and decided to watch television for a while. There was an interruption in the program. They were talking about an arrest for an attack and possible attempted murder. Suddenly, they showed a scene filmed earlier, before the sun had even come up. If I was not shocked to see the gas station, I was more shocked watching the rude attendant being led to a police car in handcuffs. It turned out that the man was a former employee. He had not even been working there, but he had gone there to get revenge on the guy who got him fired from the job. He was attacked and bloodied up pretty badly in the back room. The owner of the store came in early and noticed the fired employee working and called the police. They found the attacked worker in the back room. It was terrifying, wondering what may have been going on when I was in the store. And even though the guy went to jail, I was way too nervous to ever go back to that store again. Number 2. Each year, me and one of my closest friends, who we will call Dane, go down to visit his grandparents at their cabin in a nice, small, peaceful town in the North Georgia mountains. Me, my friend, and his grandpa are all outdoors kind of people, so we're always looking for something fun for all of us to do around the area. One night, we decided to go on a night hike on a trail not too far from the cabin. Now, this isn't the kind of trail you're probably thinking of. It really is a gravel dirt road, but a lot of hunters, campers, motorbikers, and backpackers use it. We headed out to the trail, and right as we pulled up to the trail that we were going to hike on, we noticed an older, beat-up, suspicious-looking black Chevy SUV with two middle-aged men in it, parked next to the entrance of the trail. Now, even though this is a safe area, drug deals and other kinds of sketchy activity can occur deep in these woods, so we avoided going on that trail and decided to head down to another trail about a half-mile down the road. We pulled about 50 feet or so into the trail, just outside of view from the road, parked the truck, and got out and started our hike. Our hike was off to a great start until we got about a mile in, and we started to hear a dog bark from probably about 300 feet away. We decided to just keep on going, but the dog just would not stop barking, and we didn't know if the dog was on a leash or not, and could come and attack us, so we decided to turn around and head back. When we were about, I would say, 1,000 or so feet away from the truck, we could see a car sitting behind my friend's grandpa's truck, running with its headlights on. This instantly made us worried, because who would just roll up behind a random truck at 10 at night on an isolated trail? And keep in mind, you would have had to drive into the trail to see where we parked the truck. It was not visible from the road. We stood there for about 5 minutes, trying to see if we could see anybody, but since it was so dark and pretty far away, it was hard to see anything. Fortunately for us, there was a pretty large tree next to the trail. We were able to stand behind it, so there was no way they could see us from where they were parked. My friend's grandpa took these night vision binoculars we had with us to try and get a better look, but it was still not much help. We decided to just stand there and wait for them to turn around and leave, because there was no chance we were going to walk back with this random car with potential bad people in it sitting behind our truck. After about 10 minutes of just standing there, to my absolute horror, the car drives around the truck and starts to head down the trail in our direction. As fast as we could, we climbed up this hill right next to us and hid behind a log that was sitting up on top. A few seconds later, the same beat-up black Chevy SUV that we saw outside the other trail we were originally supposed to hike on comes driving down where we were just standing not even 15 seconds ago. The car had its windows rolled down and started to slow down as it drove past us. My friend and grandpa were terrified. Our hearts were pounding out of our chests, and we were scared these guys would stop and sit there, or even worse, get out and start looking for us. Fortunately, the car just kept driving and never stopped. As soon as the car was out of sight, we got out of our hiding spot, booked it back to the truck, and got the hell out of there. I know this may not sound as scary as some others. It was definitely pretty frightening. We don't know who or what those guys wanted. My guess is they had a stash on that trail deeper in the woods and thought we stumbled upon it or something, and they were out there to confront us or even worse. A lot of things could have gone wrong. We could have walked up to the truck just as they pulled in. What if they came out and looked for us? What if they had slashed the tires to the truck? Or what if they had turned their headlights off and sat there and waited for us to come back? My friend and his grandpa actually went back in the daytime a few days later to the exact spot where we were hiding and took some pictures. The first picture is where we were standing looking at the truck and the car behind it. Off in the distance you can see our truck parked. That's exactly where we had it parked that same night. Just off to the left is the hill we rushed up to hide from the car. In the second picture you can see where our hiding spot was after my friend and his grandpa went back. They said we were lucky to have made it up there successfully, as it seemed impossible to do it as fast as we did, especially with all those shrubs and thorns in the way. If we had got up there just even 2 seconds later, we would have been seen. I can only imagine what could have happened if we didn't make it up that hill and those guys saw us. Number 3. Tube Sock. My husband, W, and I are avid and skilled outdoor people. Living close to the wilds is second nature to us, especially like a second home, a place where we can rest and heal. Whenever we have the opportunity to be out, we take it and hold on tight with both hands, because many of those places we once lived may no longer exist. We know that we didn't want to miss the chance to see them, experience them, or live them before they were gone forever. Once our ride through the wilds was over, we would reluctantly return to the mundane throes of town or city life. Even throughout my pregnancy and after the birth of our son, Quentin was always with us during those years and for years after, at least until he attended school. Then that meant retiring from the places we loved for most of the year and returning whenever we could during the summer. The surrounding forest where we chose to stay was like something out of a fairy tale. There were Pacific silver fir, grand fir, red alder, Pacific madrone, maple, and spruce, with fluorescent green moss covering the trees and the ground, amid the fallen litter of tree trunks, branches, rocks, interspersed with brake and fern and English ivy. It was like the softest carpet, where giant slugs, dragonflies in a myriad of colors, blues, greens, reds, golds, violets, and even an albino dragonfly with an iridescent sheen lived. Also there were mice, voles, frogs, toads, snails, owls, hawks, eagles, warblers, chickadees, elk, deer, moose, bobcats, cougars, bear, black bear mostly, and some grizzly, et al. In the surrounding area. To not exclude our domestic family, our long-haired tortoiseshell cats, Duchess and Ariel, and a tortoiseshell on white, or calico, named Punky, were back home, being taken care of by my friends and family. Curiously, we never saw any snakes, at least not the legless kind. Looking up through the canopy, the scant breaks in the trees allowed only briefly the golden Pacific Northwest sun, a rare occurrence being so close to the coast, with misty soft clouds filled with tiny particles of water and snow and sometimes hail. Looking around, I was half expecting to see a unicorn come prancing out of the mossy wood and lead all three of us on a merry chase to who knows where. Unfortunately, we never saw a unicorn, nor were we tempted to follow. Pulling myself away from the dreamlike state we found ourselves in, my gray eyes met W's chocolate brown, Tootsie Roll pop-colored ones, and knew that neither of us could ever capture in words where we found ourselves at that moment. W smiled his wordless grin, and I mine, while Quentin nuzzled into my husband's arm, the Pacific Northwest breeze playing in the treetops. Over the next few days, we spent our time doing the usual morning and evening exercises, fishing, exploring, shrooming, singing songs we knew that would inevitably lead to other songs we knew, etc., and of course collecting firewood, and that was almost always partially soaked from the continuous rain and moss covering. My husband and I would make tinder from the soaked wood by using the hatchet or axe that we always carried with us to shred the outer bark all along the shaft of the limb until we reached the dry, and then stripped that separate from the wet and built the perfect crosshatch house in the fire pit, piece upon piece until it stood about 2 feet high. Then we would take the exposed dry wood that was left and use the hatchet or axe to cut the remaining pieces into halves or quarters, kindling. We would build that on the outside of the tinder house up to about 3 feet high, and then ignite it either with a flint and striker or matches or a lighter. Being in a rainforest meant that you made sure to have plenty of dry firewood cut and ready nearby. The fishing was always good along the middle and south forks of the Snoqualmie, with seasonal runs of trout and salmon. We had our best luck with cutthroat and steelhead trout, and never wanted for clean water. There's nothing quite like a dip in 40-degree running river water twice a day, summer or winter, or so my husband said. As we gazed around at the beauty of our surroundings, we noticed a small creek that meandered its way down to the river. We'd walk about 35 feet to the left of the tent to a knee-high drop that revealed the source of the water. An underground spring had created a beautiful crystal-clear miniature waterfall that cascaded down onto several small, slightly rounded stones that formed an almost perfectly flat surface for the water to splash the sand and rocks and the surrounding foliage. It was about ankle deep to the next drop-off where the runoff from the waterfall began. From there it ran downhill to the Snoqualmie River. I noticed that when the mini waterfall hit the rocks, the water pooled there in large quantities, pure and clear. Sometimes we'd crouch down and drink like the animals would. Sometime later, we met with our friend from work who came out to see us with his boyfriend. They stayed and fished for a day or so, and when it was time for them to go back to Seattle, I told W that because Q was sleeping, I would just go ahead and stay there until he returned. W was to escort them to the entrance off the Interstate 90, about 10 miles away. He ended up being gone longer than expected after he helped our friends fix a flat tire on their way back to Seattle. After it got dark, I remember sitting at the entrance of our dome tent. Our son was sleeping peacefully, the fire I had built hours ago crackling in the near pitch-black night. In the darkness, the fire created hues of yellow and orange that spread out beyond the hearth in all directions, lighting enough for me to see some distance in front of us and to both sides. Once my husband told me that one of the reasons he fell in love with me was that I didn't mind being out in the wilderness, sometimes for prolonged periods, and sometimes even alone. We were always perfectly comfortable and safe whenever W and I would travel, or stay out overnight somewhere. He was okay with leaving me alone, because he knew that sometimes I liked being by myself, and that I was more than capable of defending myself. He'd seen it himself, and personally. I touched our son, thinking of W's return. I thought something must have gone wrong, because he told me exactly what he was going to do, and he was fast approaching an hour later than he said. I felt with my mind where the machete was. It was tucked up inside the tent for safekeeping. My hand moved quietly from my sleeping son to caress the handle of the massive and calming, razor-sharp, sword-like chopping blade. In a previous story, I said I was a machete girl. Now, I am a machete woman. Though I never actually cut anyone with it, I did cut the back of a man's hand all the way to the wrist once with a double-edged boot knife dagger W had given me for Christmas one year. The jerk made the serious mistake of drunkenly trying to grope me just outside a laundromat some years later. As I gazed upwards into the fast-approaching midnight blue sky, I could just make out a few stars, not obscured by the canopy of green trees, now blackened by the night. I saw a brightly star-studded sky shining down on the forest, what little light it could reflect, and despite the long shadows, would actually light up the forest floor in spots. It was those spots, along with the long black ones, that I looked for, peering around and across an almost blindingly orange glowing fire. Back in those days, I used to smoke straight, non-filtered cigarettes. I lit one up, glad I was out of doors, so the smoke wouldn't reach our son. With Q down for the count, sleeping soundly, and my ass in the open door of the tent, my knees bent to not touch ground, I relaxed, and again thought about W. When I was about halfway through the schmog, what we used to call straight cigarettes, I caught the faintest sound across from where I sat, just beyond the fire. It was like a sort of light rustling, like the sound of someone's body moving inside stiff new clothes. It seemed to be coming from somewhere to the left of me, and back in the gloom where the dirt road, an old logging road, lay still and quiet. Wanting desperately to not see a not too far away headlight carrying my husband back to me, I found myself almost dismissing the noise, like it was my distant memory. My growing concern for my husband's absence occupied my mind to the point of almost overshadowing the noise again. This time, I noticed the rustling seemed to sound nearer. Listening with the utmost intensity, my hand went instinctively to the machete. With the back of my hand brushing my son's stomach, helping me feel somewhat calmer, I heard for the first time the voice of another person. But when I thought about what he was saying, it seemed as though there was actually only one. Himself and he, or they, were having a debate about something, and the one with the slightly higher raspy voice was clearly winning the debate. Just on the other side of the fire in front of me, I flicked the schmog with my middle finger in the direction of the sound, with one clearly resonant, audible thought. Just you try it, asshole. With every bit of my Arkansas/Tennessee southern drawl, my accent becoming thicker as it went on, rang out, especially when I was mad, or so W told me, echoing into the night. Because I was not stupid enough to start a fire beyond the one I had in front of me, the butt, with sufficient force, went directly into the pit that was about 5 feet away, bouncing straight up off a rock, into the air, and fell screaming into the fire pit, all the while listening to a barely audible whisper, now neither moving closer or further away. Apparently, I'd interrupted their discussion. As I squinted into the inky blackness, I thought how stupid of me to try to see past a briskly burning fire and into the unyielding murk. Of course, neither gave quarter, so I still found myself squinting intermittently, staring unblinking, while musing what I would do to have the eyes of a cat. As the minutes passed, the cadence of the voice, too low to hear the words, was almost like a lilting melody. Resisting, I thought, this fucker was actually talking to himself, as though he was trying to convince himself of something, and that something was about me, and my son, and probably my husband. He didn't seem to care whether I knew he was there or not. With that, my hand gripped the machete tightly as I pulled it towards me. Now I put my whole self into my hearing, the muttering moving slowly closer, still arguing as if trying to decide whether it wanted to face this now potentially dangerous victim. I imagined the thing in its demented stage arguing, "How could she be a dangerous victim? Victims aren't dangerous. They're just victims." "But she is dangerous. Listen to what she said already. That's dangerous. But how could she be a dangerous victim?" And she can't be. She's either a victim or she's dangerous. She can't be both. The fire we always used to light up the place to prevent something or someone from getting too close. The fire we always used to light up the place to prevent something or someone from getting too close was now well stoked and obscured almost entirely my ability to see what I was hearing. I knew that he sure as hell could see me, and I had to do something about that. All I could think of was what I had left, my voice, my wit. So far, he didn't seem to be all that afraid of the machete, but I was definitely getting to him. At the moment he again began moving closer, I found myself getting so mad, I was literally spitting out a challenge. "Come on. I'm right here, you son of a bitch. I've got a really big knife, and I know how to use it. You want to try me? Come on, you piece of shit. I'm ready. Come on." I felt molten lava running in my blood for the protection of my son, and my love for my husband, commingling on the exact same second with the frozen emptiness of space. I could feel the mixture running through my veins, tensing me for the fight that was about to happen, when I was suddenly distracted by the sound of my son sitting up and whispering, "Mommy." I whispered back, "Stay where you are, Q." Silently, he obeyed, thinking of this thing somewhere just outside the fire, somewhere in this clearing, that had the gall to presume to enter our living space and threaten me and my son, made my hands work as if all on their own accord. Standing, I had the machete unsheathed, holding it tightly in my right hand, instinctively protecting my son with my left, extending the long, sharp blade out over the fire and in his direction. I again heard the muttering and the movement stop. I was reaching him. The rawness of my courage flared inside, dwarfing the sheer terror I felt. I began talking directly to this half-human thing, now moving closer still, albeit more slowly than before. It was kind of a defensive bluff that took on a feral female urgency, protecting the ones that I love. It almost scared me too at the time. "I will kill you. Do not dare me. I have a very good reason to stop at nothing, to cut you limb from limb, take off your head, and damn well gut you like a fish." With all the guile and wickedness I could muster, at that moment, I meant every single word of it. "You think I'm bad? Oh, just you wait until my husband gets back. He will do far worse. I'm going to stay up all night if I have to, just to watch. So if you think I'm one badass fucker, you just wait until my husband gets back." Finally getting through to him, he began to back up into the dark behind him. I felt the familiar pang of wanting W to be there with me right now. As he was already close, and moving closer every second. I yelled out as much to myself as to him, "He's back, you fuck," laughing maniacally into the stark stillness of the forest. Instantly, I could see the headlights illuminating some trees in the surrounding area, and hear the familiar engine going through the gears as W got closer. I found myself standing tall and silent. Joy filled my being. The last remnant of sound was an abrupt turn to the right, from where he'd stood menacing me for so long, and now he was skulking away in the opposite direction to avoid my husband as he was coming back to me. As happy as I was to see my husband, I was still apprehensive enough to hold my breath and listen for even the slightest change that would belie the direction the thing had left. W, now being not more than a few feet away, and me with my machete still clutched tightly in my right hand, in one smooth motion, I swept Q up on my left hip, my back literally tingling, sending out feelers to alert me to anything in the darkness behind me, and proudly turned in the direction it had fled, and took up my position next to my husband. Q was holding on to me so tightly that I said out loud, "I'm so proud of you, Quentin. Thank you so much for doing what Mom told you." Q, usually very talkative, buried his face into my arm, still holding on tight, and didn't say a word. I kissed him on the top of his thin, curly blonde head to reassure him that I'd meant what I'd said, and that he didn't have to be afraid anymore. I told W all about what had happened over the previous hours, while he surveyed the area, looking for any trace or track inside and outside our camp. I remember him putting me and Q in the car with the keys and locking all the doors. I'll never forget when he was securing me and Q and easing me into the driver's seat. Smiling, he said, "That's my little toughie." Sometimes he called me his little Valkyrie. Then his voice took on the most serious and precise tone. "If anything happens, you drive." Looking him in the eye, I nodded in agreement. Whenever there was possibility of danger, W would move with the most incredible speed, moving from place to place, scanning, sniffing, watching almost like a big cat. When he was sure that all was clear, he went to the tent and collected all the sleeping bags and whatever else we might need, leaving the rest. Still constantly scanning in all directions for any movement or sound. He was more than ready to strike hard if anything happened. After dousing the fire and loading up our things, he drove us to another place he knew, that was in the opposite direction of where this person had gone, and far enough away that we could try to sleep in the car for the rest of the night. The little bit of sleep that we managed to get was broken and fitful. W and I were in the front, reclining, while Q slept in the back. After W had explained what had happened that kept him so long, he surprised me with a bottle of WT-101, my favorite bourbon whiskey. We didn't drink any that night, though. I remember his taking my hand over and over all night, reassuring me that he was there now and that everything was going to be okay. And I, without a doubt, believed him. The scenes of what had already transpired, however, kept replaying over and over again in my mind, so I never really slept. It was like a never-ending slideshow of photographic horror. Paradoxically, when morning broke through the trees, it was another rare, beautiful day, unseasonably clear and uncharacteristically sunny, with no wind, no clouds, and totally quiet. Still hesitant, we felt determined and resolved to return to our original camp and collect all of our things and then get the hell out of there. Once we arrived, we scoured the area and eventually got everything packed and made our one last pilgrimage to our magical, spiritual little healing spring and mini waterfall. Cautiously, I walked down, alone, to fill a bottle of water, and noticed the oddest, strangest, most out-of-place thing I'd ever seen in my life. There, lying completely flat, half on one of the rocks and half on the moss, lay the most perfect, new, single, stark white, red-striped tube socks I'd ever seen. It was stretched out and soaked from the waterfall, and had to have been placed there recently, because there was absolutely no dirt or sediment to be seen anywhere on the sock. It looked like it had been removed brand new from a package and just laid there, its mate nowhere to be found. Besides, we had used the waterfall many times, and it wasn't there yesterday, before W left to take our friends to the interstate. I said, "Hey W, come here. You have to see this." When he joined me, he was amazed and only said 2 words. Absolutely bizarre. The strange object seemingly insinuated itself into our remote pastoral scene. It took on an ominousness that we wouldn't learn the significance of until decades later. We didn't touch the sock. After filling the jugs, we gave this most beautiful and magical place one last look, thanking Christ Jesus for providing it and protecting us while we were there, but we never went back. Years later, after having moved back to Arizona, I was relaxing with our 4 cats, 2 tuxedo females named Rachel and Kiri, and Tordion White or Calico named Dory, and a lone male tricolor half Somali named Blinky, who looks just like a little fox. We were all together listening on our overstuffed couch, listening to Killer Orange Cat on YouTube. We were listening to some of his older videos again because we enjoyed them so much. The one with the serial killer, Aileen Warnose, came up as the story played through and finished with, "Because you never know where a Killer Orange Cat might be hiding." And the mischievous "good night" is my favorite part because it sounds like he's toying with you, playing with you like a cat does a mouse. After that, in the recommended videos section of YouTube, I saw a video program called Mr. Balin. I'd already listened to some of his videos before and liked them a lot. The one called Mommy is in the Trees utterly appalled me, and when I realized that this thing was active between 1985 and 2006, and always left a calling card knotted around its female victims' throats, but with one exception: the pristine white tube sock with 3 red stripes we found the next morning at the waterfall. All those years ago, the message in my mind yelled, "I came back for you, but you weren't there. This should have been for you. Good night." I didn't smile at that. We were out there between 1994 and 1997 and never heard anything about any of this until I saw it years later on Mr. Balin on YouTube. When Mr. Balin's story came to a close, a cold chill ran over me like the ice-cold water of the Snoqualmie River. With a few intakes of breath, I looked around me and discovered that all of my cats had their gorgeous eyes peering at me questioningly, like, "What's wrong, Mom?" Instantly, my mind jerked violently back to the memory of Q sitting up suddenly in the tent all those years ago and quietly asking, "Mommy?" For some moments, I was back there in that tent with my son behind me, the fire between us, with the muttering and the movement just on the other side, waiting impatiently for W's return. Forced back to a time I hadn't thought of for years, I finally realized what we had actually gone through very nearly 2 lifetimes ago, the most harrowing, near-death experience we had ever had. My mind kept taking me back to the little mini waterfall and coming to the same conclusion all those years ago. We had fought the tube sock killer and won. If you want to learn more, search YouTube for M-Ballen, the tube sock killer. Hey y'all, Killer Orange Cat here. If you like this video, please let me know by hitting the like button. If you're not already subscribed to Killer Orange Cat, feel free to click the subscribe button and the bell below, or wait for the icon of Ichigo the cat that will appear at the end of this closing. Leave me a comment, and share the video with someone you think might enjoy it. If you have an original story you'd like narrated on Killer Orange Cat, please email it to the address included in the description. But most importantly, don't forget to make sure to check in your closet and check under your bed, because you never know where a Killer Orange Cat might be hiding. Good night.